So I'm going to show you how to create a form in React that uses a new useActionState hook. We're going to start from a blank canvas, so we're going to run npx create React app. I'm going to call it React 19 form, but you can call it whatever you like. I'm also going to use the TypeScript template as well by doing a -- template flag and TypeScript. Once that's finished installing, we want to cd into that repo, so cd into React 19 form for me, and then if you run code.-r, that will then open up that repo in VS Code. I want to make sure that those dependencies have installed correctly, so I'm going to run npm semicolon npm start, so after it finishes installing, it will then run the development server. And if we head on over to localhost 3000, we can see our application running. Just going to start by ripping out some of the stuff that we don't need. We don't need any of that stuff in app.tsx. If you open that up, and so we just have the opening and closing header tags. Under the source directory, we're going to create a new folder called components. Let's just create a new file called header.tsx. If you don't already have this installed, I'd recommend you download these code snippets. We're going to go ahead and use RFC, which stands for React Functional Component. Let's create some h1 tags and write out the title of our form, which will be React 19 form. We're going to head on back to the app.tsx and import our newly created header.tsx component. While we're here, let's go ahead and remove those unused imports. Let's take a look at how our app's looking. Cool. Time to get started on some form components. First off, create a new folder under components called form. Then going to create a component called form container. And running that RFC snippet again. I'm going to give this div a class name of form-container, just to give it some basic styles to make it not look so terrible. Now under the form folder, we're going to create another component called textinput.tsx. Again, running RFC to create that template. Now within this components div, we want to create a label. Open up some curly braces and put label in here, as that's going to come down as a prop. We'll also have an input, which is self-closing. So let's add that label prop now. Since we're adding props, we're also going to create an interface for this component. So using TypeScript, we can describe the types of the props. So label here, that's going to be a string. And the value, that's also going to be a string. And a name as well, which is going to be a string. Now adding those props as well. And don't forget to then tell the component about that interface as well. So we're going to give that name to the input, and we're also going to have the ID to be the same as the name we passed down. And I don't actually think we need value, so we're going to take that out. We're going to remove that prop as well, and we'll have to remove that from our interface as well. So label HTML4, that's also going to be the name, because that needs to match up with the input. Now if we go back to our form container, we can import that text input we just created and pass down those props. Oh, very important step, we need to wrap our inputs within a form element as well. So let's create that, move our text input inside the form. I'm just going to pass down our props, so our label. Name is important, as that's going to determine how we access this input's data later when using the useActionState's action function. That will all become clear later. Got a squiggly red underline here, and that's because the interface still had value, even though we don't actually need value. As we're not managing the individual state for this input, that's going to be handled by the hook. Just copy and paste to that. And then also going to take in the last name, copy and paste again, and we're going to take in the email as well. Again, being aware of what we're setting the name property to, as that is what we are going to use to access our data. Let's back to the app.tsx, and let's import our newly created form container. And there's the result. It doesn't look great, so hit F12, and we're going to add some styles. I just wanted to walk through how I usually add styles, so I always open up the console and play around with the CSS there before applying it to the style sheet itself. So we're giving it display effects, gap 1.5 rem, and giving it a max width of 40 VW. Let's apply those styles. Open up the form container, add a class names attribute to the form. We're going to call it personal-form. Then head on over to our app.css with the same name that we just put on that form, .personal-form. We're going to create a new class and add in those styles we put on the browser earlier. So that's display flex, gap 1.5 rem, and max width 40 VW. You may need to give your browser a refresh, but do that and you should get the same result that we had earlier. And we're going to add a submit button, so under form, create submit button.tsx. Once that's been created, use RFC once again. In this containing div, we're going to create a button, so it's going to be a native HTML button, give that a type of submit, and for the name we can just call it submit as well, so that'll be the actual label that displays. And I guess it doesn't need to be wrapped in the div, so let's get rid of that as well, so it just returns that button. Head on back over to the form container, and we're going to import that button underneath our inputs. That looks quite dreadful, so we're going to do some layout updates here. Back on in our form container, create a div, wrap all of our inputs in that div. We're going to grab that class name that we had on the form, and we're just going to put that in the div instead, the one that's wrapping our inputs, and update the name of that to personal form-inputs, as that sort of more accurately describes what it is. I'll open up our app.css again, and we need to update that class in there as well to have -inputs to. Okay, that layout's more like it. Although the button could do with some better styles, so we're going to go hit F12 again, open up the DevTools, and we're going to play around with some styles. So matches the rest of the page, we're going to give it a sort of dark style. So give the background a hex of 1A, 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 make the color white, give it some padding so it's not too squished. About 12px by 24px did fine. Let's increase the font size as well, so it's more in line with the rest of the form. So a font size of 1em looks good for me. We're going to get rid of the default border, so give it border none, and also give it a border radius of 8 pixels. We want to change the cursor to be a pointer, and a bit of margin top as well, so it's not hugging the rest of the form inputs. And finally we're going to add a box shadow as well to make it sort of come off the page a little bit. So give it the values 0, 4px, 8px, RGBA of 000, 0.25, so very dark box shadow. I'm happy with that button now, but those inputs could do it for a little bit of work as well. So just going to increase the font size a bit, so again it's more in line with the rest of the form, and also add a bit of padding so that the text doesn't hug the input when you type in there. I found that a font size of 0.75em and padding 0.25rem did the trick. Alrighty, back in our app.css, we're going to switch on to the button first. So if you go open up the submit button, add a class name of just submit-button. We're also going to need a class name to our input as well. So open up text input and give it a class name of text-input. And finally, we're going to add those styles that we were putting into the console earlier, into the DevTools, and we're going to add that to our app.css. Getting a simple one out of the way with first, text-input, that class is going to have a font size of 0.75em. I'm also going to add a little bit of padding to that. The submit button, we've got quite a few styles to add to this now, so we're going to add the background color, make it nice and dark. So that was pound 1A1A1A and give it a colour of white so you can still read the text on that dark background. Bit of padding, 12px, 24px. Remove the default border, add the border radius, and increase the font size. And the most complicated style, the box shadow, so that's 0, 4px, 8px, RGBA 000, and then 0.25. One thing I didn't add in the console earlier, in the DevTools, was a hover style. So when we hover over the button, we want it to be a bit darker. So dot submit button, and then colon hover, add a background colour of pound 333, and that will give it a different background colour when we hover over it. Almost forgot to add the margin top, so add margin top 1 rem as well, and then that should all be finished. Yeah, it's not the best, but it's a lot prettier than it was. It's time to add React 19 to the project, so we're going to open up the package.json. It's these packages here, React DOM, React, and then the 2 types as well, because we are using TypeScript. We'll have to update those as well. Once React 19 is stably released, this will simply be a case of just npm I React 19, but as it isn't, we have to do npm install save exact React RC and React DOM at RC as well. And we need to update the @types React DOM and @types React. So we're actually just going to put in npm types-react @rc, and similarly for React DOM, npm types-react-dom @rc again. And there's a couple of overrides we need to add as well. So go to the bottom of our package.json here. And these are the 2 overrides for those types as well. So @types React, and we're just going to type in the same thing we typed above. So npm types-react @rc, and again for the React DOM, following that pattern as well. Now when deving this, I actually ran into an issue where I couldn't update the packages. So as you will see here, I ran npm I, and I got this error message. First, try to get around this by running npm I -- legacy peer deps. However, this did allow me to install the packages. Like, it looked like it succeeded, but I hadn't actually properly updated the React types. The way I did get around this was by using yarn instead. So I deleted I don't think I've deleted it yet, but I do delete the package doc.json, and I run yarn to install the dependencies with yarn, and then yarn start, and that loads everything up correctly. Yes, here we go. So delete that package.json, the lock file, not the package.json file, as we have a yarn lock file. We don't need to have both. Right, now here's the fun bit. So we're going to go into form container. We're going to import useActionState. That's from the React package. useActionState exposes 3 things for us here. So it gives us state, action, and pending. So pending is going to be a boolean. That's just going to tell us when our action is running, which we can handle by showing a loading spinner on the front end or something like that. The action will be the form action that we want our form to fire when we press submit, or you can even hook up the form action to another element on the form, like a button for example. And state, that is the state of our form. So remember those names we set earlier, first name, last name and email. State will hold the values to those properties. Let's create the action function that our form will fire. So we're going to call this submit user. It's going to be an asynchronous arrow function, so add the keyword async. We'll finish off filling out the rest of it later. And we're going to pass this function to our hook, so add submit user data in the parentheses there, and this gives us 2 parentheses we have access to previous state and form data. And form data is going to be whatever the current state of our form is. So remember those values we had earlier in our inputs. So first name, last name and email. Form data is going to have the values to those inputs. And previous state self-explanatory. Let's go above our component and create an interface. I always like to start my interfaces with a capital I. So I form state. It's going to have a name, which is a string. Can just copy and paste this because it will also have a last name, which is going to be a string, and an email, which is also of type string. And we should tell previous state that is going to be the type of iForm state. There's one more thing we need to create, which is the initial state. So let's open up an object and give it the type of iForm state first. And then in that object, we're just going to have our properties, which is first name, last name, and email. And those can all just be blank strings. We need to pass that initial state to our hook. Okay, and then let's update our submit user data, our form action, to return the previous state. Oh, the useActionState actually takes in another parameter, but it's just an optional one. We don't have to pass it in, and that is the permalink. Oh, this is used to specify the URL where the form state should be sent in case the JavaScript bundle hasn't loaded yet. For example, if the final page of our form was /submitted, then that should be our permalink. As this form isn't going to take us to another page, we can just leave that blank. Right, let's add our form action to our form. So action, that should equal action. And that just means that when we hit our submit button, because our button has type of submit, it will then run that submit user data action. Let's go inside the submit user data function and access the data that we have on our form. And the form data parameter has this method .get, or get I should just say, and that will actually extract the value from those inputs. So we're going to do this 3 times, 1 for each input. And just so TypeScript knows what to expect, we're going to cast this as string. When developing anything, I'm a big fan of using console logs just to get a nice snapshot of what's actually happening. This can help sort of debug things, and it's just how I like to dev. So I'm going to console log out all of those values just so we can double check they are what they are supposed to be. In a real application, this would usually make a call to a database or whatever persistent storage we have set up, and that's going to be asynchronous. That's not going to happen instantly, so we're going to simulate that by using a set timeout. That way we can see our pending in action as well. To make use of that pending property we're exposing through useActionState, we're going to create this if statement to check if pending is true, and if it is, I'm just going to print out some text to the front end. But what we would usually do in a proper application is display some sort of loading spinner. There's some great libraries for loading spinners. And again, just to make sure everything's working how we expect, we're going to console log the state. In fact, let's go ahead and display the first name, last name and email to the front end. So first we're going to check if they exist. So is state.email not a blank string? If that's the case, then we want to display the email. So let's open up a p tag. Email is going to be the sort of label, and state.email, that's going to be the value. I'm going to copy that 3 times, and of course update email to be first name, and we'll do the same for last name in a second as well. I just realized we haven't updated our action function to actually return the updated state. So let's return an object which will have our properties, first name, last name and email. We're going to set that to be inputted first name because that's what we're extracting from the form, input last name and inputted email as well. I also realized that our set timeout isn't actually going to do anything because it doesn't return a promise. A wait won't actually wait. So what we want to do is we want to wrap that in a promise. Create a new promise with the new keyword. And then within the promise, we're going to have this resolve, and that's going to be an arrow function. We just want to cut and paste our old set timeout to be inside this promise now. Add some curly braces around our set timeout arrow function because we don't want to just console log something out. We also want to set resolve to true to resolve our promise. Now we've done all that work, let's see if it actually does work. So open up the form, type in whatever you want, and go ahead and hit submit. Well, there's our promise working. Cool. We can see the state has successfully updated and we're displaying that nicely on the front end. And that's all there is to useActionState. As you can see, it's short beats setting up individual state objects for every single input. Having them all handled in this one place in this action is really handy. And the fact that we can work with asynchronous code so easily now, and how we have the pending property as well to handle things like loading, it's just really handy to have. This example wasn't the best for showing off previous state, but that's useful for when you need to know the previous state to make updates, like in a counter, for example. Thanks for watching.